Order is that Councillor Casey said that she's mentioning something now that hasn't been brought up in the debate. She cannot, in a closing address, bring in new material, and that's what she is doing now. So I'll ask you to desist in that new material aspect.
It's in my notice of motion, but you've also, these are all the presentations we've had, George, which you've been present at.
Yes,
this
is
not
talk
new.
To me,
it's
talk
in
to the
the notice of motion. Turn to the page and you'll see. Turn to the page.
Councillor Casey, just some gentle advice. Probably if we just held things at a sensible level, there may be more support. Councillor, the information that I'm hearing is actually mostly from either A, the presentations, or B, in the attached information. Councillor Casey probably wrapping up now.
It's on page 120, George.
Is now a good thing to do.
Auckland Council currently provides 1,412 houses for older people. As at January 2016, there were 380 older people waiting. No. On our agenda, page 120.
It is in
the point about that, George, and why I raised it is to meet the current demand, we need to increase our stock by 25%. To meet January's list, not 2036, when 1 in 4 Aucklanders will be over the age of 65. So this is about directing. Are we in charge of Auckland or are we not? If we are in charge of Auckland, we don't have woolly policy that says maintain at least. We say increase, because that's what I think it means. And I'm sure that it will get support around this table. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that's closed the debate. Thank you, Councillor Casey. Councillors, can we just... It would be really, really good if we could just retain a bit of decorum around the table, remembering that these are important issues to our community.
By division, Madam Chair, please.
By division. We'll put the recommendation by division. Thank you.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Councillor Nye.
Aye.
Councillor Brewer.
No.
Councillor Casey.
Yes.
Councillor Cashmore.
No.
Councillor Clow.
Yes.
Councillor Cooper.
No.
Councillor Darby.
Against.
Councillor Filipina.
Aye.
Councillor Fletcher.
Yes.
Crum.
For.
Councillor Lee.
Aye.
Member Nominee.
Aye.
Councillor Penrose.
No.
Quacks.
No.
The Taipari.
Aye.
Councillor John Walker.
Aye.
Oh, sorry,
Yes.
Councillor. Sorry, just hang on a sec. Sir John, aye or no? It was an aye.
Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
Yes.
Councillor Watson.
Yes.
Councillor Webster.
No.
Councillor Wood.
No.
Deputy Mayor Holt.
Yes.
It is
I thought you
carried
agreed with
by
me.
14.
Guess that one.
I'm just thinking of
Wayne
something.
Walker's brochure now.
Okay.
I'm just thinking what else we can
Right.
get changed in an action plan. Maybe we should bring
Thank you,
another
councillors. So that will come back to finance, and if agreed, then there will be a consultation process associated with us. Councillors, will move on to reports
in the action plan.
pending. I'm happy to move that. If someone would like to second that, Member Taipari will second that. Any questions? Sorry, Councillor. Councillors, can we just focus? I'll put that. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Item number 10, summary of memos. I'll move that.
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Darby. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Against, carried. And we're on item number 11 now. I am aware that Rick Boven had another appointment. So, we've managed to keep Rick. I'm terribly sorry about the long and protracted debate prior to your report. So, warm welcome, and we're in your hands.
Thank you very much. I'll keep this relatively short and then take some questions if you'd like. Since our last update, we've appointed consultants, EY, with their consortium, and the consultants and the consensus working group have been meeting every 3 to 4 weeks. And there are quite a lot of ways to understand and explain the structure of the problem that we're trying to solve in the analysis, but I've chosen one to share with you that will fit into the time available. And these are my words and they reflect my understanding. There's lots that I won't cover. So the consultants and the consensus working group worked together to develop what they call an investment logic map, which actually showed three critical questions. The first one is that freight and cruise capacity growth is needed to accommodate Auckland's growth, but growth at the current location is likely to be constrained. The second one is that there are competing aspirations for the land that is currently occupied by the port, coming from things like cruise, development, amenity, and so on. And third, the port activities are causing issues for the communities and the environment around it, and there are calls for restriction of those activities or removal of the port. So the consultants started off by examining the demand growth, the development options at the port, and the attractiveness of alternative locations. And the locations analysis began with a long list of technically feasible options. And that was narrowed down to a shorter list of technically feasible options. What I mean by technically feasible is you can get a ship in there and there's a place that you can berth it. There's some land available on the shore that you could conceivably build a port in. And those options were reviewed with the reference group in February and narrowed down to a smaller list. The shorter list was then subjected to an MCA analysis, a multi-attribute criteria analysis, where we looked into the physical, economic, social, cultural and environmental characteristics of each of the options. And from that analysis, three areas have been selected: the Firth of Thames, the Manukau and Muriwai. That analysis was then tested by removing all of the financial and physical variables to see if we got the same result if we only included the social, cultural and environmental variables, and we did, which was a good test of sensitivity because it indicated that the set that we had was robust across a financial economic lens as well as across a broader lens. Meanwhile, there was ongoing examination of the demand, the port capacity and the productivity. And we've now concluded that there are three fundamental issues that the study needs to resolve. The first issue is, do we actually need an alternative port location? And that's still work in progress on that. There are some differences of data and of view and quite a lot of uncertainty, as you would imagine, because our requirement is to consider a period of longer than 50 years. And when you consider a period of longer than 50 years, you've got population growth estimated midpoint 2.6 million in Auckland, high estimate around 3 million, GDP growth around 2.5 times the current growth, and quite a lot of uncertainties around technologies and port operations. Given all of that though, we think that the options that were offered to us of reducing the footprint is not viable. We probably cannot contain Auckland's freight and cruise task by passing load to Tauranga and or to Northport because of their capacity and their existing growth needs. We're unlikely to be able to accommodate expected volumes over a 50 to 100 year time frame within the current footprint. It might be possible to accommodate growth within an expanded footprint if the demand growth is slow and if the productivity growth is high. So the question that we're asking ourselves at the moment is, do we need an alternative location option? And that leads us to question two. If we do need an alternative location option, where should that be? And so the consultants are currently conducting a benefit cost analysis to look at 5 options. The port on its current footprint, which is a base case, what the technical people call the do minimum case. That's unlikely to be feasible. An expanded footprint, 3 locations options, and that's what the 5 options are. I don't think any of those options are likely to be attractive options. They all involve material costs and they all involve material externalities. Yeah. That's where we got to yesterday. We reviewed all of that with a wider reference group. The analysis is continued in process. And if an alternative location option is required, then we'll need to consider issue 3. And that's the question of how do we get there? And it has 2 aspects. What's the decision process? I don't mean in a political or community sense, but what's the kind of logic of the decision process? At what point would you need to make a decision? What are the trigger points that would need you to want to start exercising that option, and how would you prepare for that in the meantime? And then the second aspect of option 3 is, of issue 3, what are the actions that would be required for the transition? How do you step from one location to another if that's where we end up recommending? We're expecting a consultants report on April the 29th. They are in the thick of analysis and drafting. The CWG, Consensus Working Group, has meetings scheduled throughout May and June. We're expecting another review with the reference group, although we haven't arranged that firmly yet. And we plan to report to the ADC on schedule at the end of June, subject to progress as we currently expect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So we'll take questions. I've got the Mayor, Councillor Cashmore. Just reminding people, this is our questions of clarification. This is not our debate, nor are we directly in this process. So just making that clear. Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Rick, great to see you, sort of coming back here and reporting. So my question is not so much relating to the update that you're presenting to us. The critical part of bringing together this group was to get a sense of reasonable agreement across the different parts of Auckland, and this has been the most intense debate, really, in the amalgamation years. Can you just sort of give us, you're going to come back in June, how do you feel this group's working together, and you see you have reasonable optimism as a chair that you're going to bring reasonably well agreed recommendations back to us? Might be a big ask, but you've been sitting there for a while.
That's a fair question. All will be revealed in the next 2 months, but let me give you my perspective on that. When people came together, and I think when anyone comes to this issue, it's interesting that they all seem to know the answer, and I think that was certainly true of the members of the consensus work group when we got together. They all knew the answer, but they were all different answers, of course.
Yeah, that's a question.
And so we've spent a lot of time developing shared understanding of the problem and the issues, and I think we've succeeded in doing that. So I think that's the first part of the answer. There is a shared understanding. Secondly, we have developed shared understanding of the data and of the evidence. There's, I think every member of the group has said, look, we acknowledge that this is about the long-term future of Auckland, but we also need to acknowledge that every member of the group has their own constituencies and interests in this that they need to navigate. And so we are having an evidence-based discussion. We'll need to move to a discussion that's a little broader of that once we have the consultants' report on the table. But I think there's a good spirit in the group. There's good dialogue. It's robust. But there's a shared understanding of where we are and of the problem that we need to solve.
Got it. Good. Gives us a shot.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Councillor Cashmore.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Bowen. Fascinating piece of work. 2 relatively simple but potentially difficult questions. A government-led or New Zealand-led ports strategy, is that coming to your consideration? And the other one is New Zealand or Auckland, or it would be New Zealand, end up going to be a subsidiary port to that of, say, Sydney or Melbourne, so we're just a regional hub from the major international port being in Australia?
Yeah, the question of the larger national issue has sort of been around the problem for some time. And it's been clear to us that there is no national strategy, and my understanding is there is no plan to develop a national strategy. So our response to that was to say, well, look, we'll work out what the best location option is for Auckland. And should that depend upon a national strategy, then we may have to broaden the question in order to answer that. And I think we've got ourselves to a point at the moment where we don't think that there is a need to consider a national strategy for us to be able to answer the question that we need to ask. In terms of the sort of wider issue around regional hubbing and how that might connect up, again, it's the same answer in a way. It will obviously be relevant to the future and how the port unfolds. But a lot of what is going on in Auckland, not all of it, but a large part of it, is bringing imports in for Auckland's population. Auckland's population and GDP is going to grow materially So no matter what the hubbing solution is in the region, you'll still see a lot of imports coming into Auckland via the port.
There's the rub. I've got councillor Crum, councillor Walker, councillor Darby.